It's a really difficult time for arts nonprofits, for small press publishing, for literary arts organizations of all shapes and sizes. One of the things that it doesn't seem like from the outside is that these organizations are fragile. No matter how established they seem, they are vulnerable. And these cuts in funding that so many of us are experiencing, I would say most of us are experiencing, is a real challenge for these organizations, and Poets House is not excluded from that. We get funding, we normally get funding from the NEA, but also the NEH and also the IMLS, because we're a library as well as a literary center. So we're triple impacted in a way. One thing, if you're interested in helping out with that, if you have the means, if you have the ability to, we do have a fundraiser coming up in a couple weeks. It's our annual walk across the Brooklyn Bridge. Has anybody here done that before? Okay, a few people. Show of hands and show of applause as to what your experience of that was. It's really amazing. It's, you know, from the organizational side, it's kind of a nightmare because we logistically we start with 200 or so people on City Hall Plaza. We do an outdoor poetry reading there, then we all walk across the Brooklyn Bridge, stop halfway, do another poetry reading there, continue across the Brooklyn Bridge, stop at Jane's Carousel, have a poetry reading there, and then we go out to dinner from that. So it's a lot of fun. It's a wonderful, beautiful event. It's a collective human movement for poetry. It's very special. So if you have the means, tickets are available on our website, or you can talk to somebody at the front desk. You can also just donate, and any amount helps. And again, don't give to Poets House if you have a deeper connection to another organization, but do give if you can, because it is so important, and it is our responsibility as community members, as members who are readers, as people who are passionate about the literary arts. It's our responsibility. Poetry is a gift economy, and we all live off of that. So consider it if you can. I'm very excited for this evening, so I don't want to bum us all out. But this kind of a evening is exactly what makes these communities so special. People coming together to listen to a poet talk about a poet that has influenced her, and really talk about that legacy, that literary legacy, a nod to the past while looking toward the future. That's exactly what poetry does. And I'm really excited to hear Victoria's lecture. I'm going to bring up my colleague Nick Buffin, who's going to be our MC for the evening. So, please give Nick a big round of applause.
Hello, everyone. If you left your phone in the bathroom, it's at the front door. It's at the front desk. My name is Nick Buffin. I'm the operations manager here at Poets House. For those of you joining us here for the first time, we're a library and nonprofit, like Rob said. We're a meeting space, and we have one of the most comprehensive public poetry collections in the world. We're open Tuesday through Friday, 11 to 7, and Saturday, 11 to 6. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome you all to tonight's Passwords program with Victoria Chang. Passwords is one of our signature series here at Poets House, and it's been running for nearly 40 years. Passwords programs offer a firsthand viewpoint into the literary legacies, I think Rob said this too, that have shaped the work of countless poets. In this talk, poet, editor, and critic Victoria Chang will revisit Lorine Niedecker's Midwestern background and study one of her longer poems, Paean to Peace, examining how water and nature informed Niedecker's approach to story and narrative. Victoria Chang's latest book of poems, With My Back to the World, was published in 2024 by Farrar, Straus and Giroux and Corsair Books in the UK. It received the Forward Prize for Best Collection of Poetry, was named the finalist for the Kingsley Tufts Award, and was named Best Book of the Year by NPR, The Guardian, Lit Hub, and Electric Literature. She serves as the Bourne Chair of Poetry at Georgia Tech and is the Director of Poetry at Tech. After Victoria's talk, well, there might be time for a quick Q&A, and there will be a reception upstairs. Please join me in warmly welcoming Victoria Chang.
How are you all? Thanks for coming out. Was it hard to get here? No? Some of you, it's hard to get here. Okay, so let me just make sure I look at my time. And so we're gonna do a whole bunch of stuff today. I have slides too. And I feel like we're a good size that we might do a little chatting sort of here and there, but I wrote this talk as a talk, and we'll just sort of see how it goes. You have a handout on your chair. If you don't have one, you might want to grab one. I've numbered the stanzas for you, so when we actually, talk about certain parts of the poem, I'll reference the numbers and things like that. It's a bit of a long poem, and so as much as I'd love to go stanza by stanza, it would take us a really long time. So you'll kind of see that we'll be jumping around and there's only so much I can do in the time that I have. Okay, and I love slides because I'm a visual person, so hopefully you'll enjoy them as well. Okay, so here we go. John Ashbery in 3 poems wrote, oh, thank you for having me, Rob, and for Poet's House. Yeah, I'm so terrible. Okay, John Ashbery in 3 poems wrote, I thought if I could put it all down, that would be one way. And next the thought came to me that to leave all out would be another and truer way. When I used to think about and read Lorine Niedecker's poems, I had this idea that her poems were difficult, ambiguous, too spare. But more recently, I decided to revisit Niedecker's work. This time, though, I spent a little more time reading about Niedecker first, her background, her biography, taking more of a biographical criticism approach to her work versus my more typical new criticism way of reading a text as text within itself and close reading a text solely within its own container. But the more I learned about Niedecker's backstory, the less the backstory seemed to matter. And then I began to think about why, which led to this talk. I began to think that the ambiguity in her poems were actually the gifts of the poems. I began to think of the absence in her poems as a new kind of presence. And the particular kind of ambiguity in Niedecker's poems actually creates openings rather than obfuscations. And as I'll posit here today, Niedecker creates ambiguity through, and we'll talk about some of these things, syntactical rearrangements, punctuation, line breaks, along with other elements such as music and sound, rhythms, and more, not to replace traditional narrative or storytelling, but to enlarge its possibilities. Niedecker is known for her miniature poems. How many of you have read her poems before? Some. And would you say you mostly have read her small poems? Yeah, me too. Until I started reading her body of work. And I thought we would maybe learn differently, maybe not more, but differently about her by reading my favorite. This is my favorite, which I don't know if anyone's read this poem. It's called Paean to Place, and talk about her poetics and style through reading this poem together. So again, people like her short poems a lot. We'll read a few of them here just sort of quickly, but I like her, longer ones, because even with the longer ones, I tend to think of the longer poems as being smaller units. So they're short little poems that are kind of collaged and stitched together, which you'll see, I hope, in a second. So even though I just talked about the lack of importance of biographical background, I'm going to actually do the opposite and talk a little bit about her. Does anyone know a lot about her? Nobody. Great. Someone went like this back there. So yeah, people, if you position a question like that, no one's going to agree because they don't know what's coming after that. So she lived from 1903 to 1970, and only child. Here are just a couple photos of her through the years. I love the one of her playing the instrument in the background. You can see the water, which we'll talk about in a second. So she spent most of her life on Black Hawk Island in Wisconsin, and or in that area near Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin, which was marshy, very marshy, and prone to flooding. Hence the water imagery in her poems. I feel like it's appropriate that it's been raining all day. In one of her letters, she wrote, the Brontes had their moors, I have my marshes. So each spring the water rose and came in, and houses and boats were tied to them in case of emergency flooding. It was a really hard place to live. This is just some photos of her house, and they're just built on these platforms. And she often wrote about the flood to Sid Corman, which was a supporter of hers and friend of hers. And in her letters, in May 1962, she wrote, another flood come and gone, this time not in my house. Muskrats grinding their catch just outside my door in the middle of the night, a heavy door with cracks. In 1963, she wrote, we have frogs here now, and Sora rails giggling, no flood this spring, very unnatural. And then in September 1965, she wrote, torrential rains, water rising at fort, my husband's cucumbers and squash swimming, depend on nothing. Her family and grandparents owned much of the island. At some point, they owned an inn, and then they sold it and shifted to a carp fishing business. You may think, why all this information? You'll see maybe why in a second when we read the poem. She spent her childhood in nature. In a letter, she wrote, I spent my child outdoors, red-winged blackbirds, willows, maples, boats, fishing, the smell of tarred nets, twittering and squawking noises from the marsh. And again, she grew up with very few financial resources. Her father sent carp, which is using a certain kind of net to catch fish, and her mother helped. Poverty and flooding was just those things were a part of her upbringing. Her mother was also deaf, which happened after Niedecker's birth, and her mother struggled with depression. Niedecker had vision issues too, and some argue her poems rely more heavily on sound, which we'll talk about because of that, but I'm not sure I agree with that. I make an argument that sound replaced conventional narrative, which I'll talk a little bit about later. So in 1922, she left to attend Beloit College to study literature, but returned after a year to care for her mother, who was deteriorating. And her mother and father divorced. Her father had an extended affair with Goethe Runke, a neighbor who's referenced in several of her poems. And in 1928, she married Frank Hartwig, and she worked for a couple years as a librarian's assistant, and during that time, she began publishing her poems in a few journals. In 1930, she and Hartwig lost their jobs in the Great Depression, and they divorced. So she's known to be a very hard worker and did a lot of sort of manual labor type of jobs. So from 1957 to 63, she cleaned kitchens and scrubbed floors at the Fort Atkinson Memorial Hospital. In 1963, she married Albert Millen, who was a house painter, and they liked to travel together, which I find so endearing, and they explored the Midwest, and that exploration and trip inspired the long poem Lake Superior, which is a wonderful poem. Wave Books actually did this really wonderful sort of republication of it, and there are a bunch of critical essays in there, so you can check that out if you're interested. Marrying Millen also allowed her to quit her hospital job and focus on writing. Just a little bit more on her background, and then we're going to get to the poem. In terms of her poetry background, I think this is important. She remained on the margins of the poetry scene for her whole life, and she had a lot of difficulties publishing her poems and books, although she was admired by some of her peers at the time. To give you the time frame that she lived, Marion Moore, William Carlos Williams, Sid Corman, who I mentioned, and a few others. She didn't read in public at all and preferred a very quiet life. She only published a few books in her lifetime, all with small presses and all varied. If you want to read all of her work together, the number 7, the collected works edited by Jenny Penberthy, was published in 2002 by the University of California Press. That's a good resource. So the big change in her work and poetics occurred in 1931 when she read Louis Zukofsky's Zukofsky's objectivist issue of Poetry magazine, and then she began a correspondence with him that lasted 40 years. Poetry published a poem, When Ecstasy is Inconvenient, and some of her early surrealism is exhibited here. This poem actually is in your packet. It has a rhetorical argument and is different from her later poems. And I just put it here because I thought it might be fun to just read it and just kind of hold it in the back of our heads while we sort of read her other poem, which we're going to read more closely. So this is, again, one of her shorter early poems. So who wants to read it for us? Go for it. Thank you. Yeah, we can pull it out. Here.
When ecstasy is inconvenient. Feign a great calm. All gay transport soon ends. Chant. Who knows? Flight's end or flight's beginning for the resting goal.
Chuck.
Heart. Be still. Say there is money, but it rusted. Say the time of moon is not right for escape. It's the color in a lower sky, too broadly suffused, or the wind in my tie. Know amazedly how often one takes his madness into his own hands and keeps it. Thank you.
Thank you. I love that ending of that poem. We could talk about this poem for a while, but I'm not going to use our time to talk about this poem. I'm just going to have you sit with it. I mean, the title is it's one of those helping titles. But yeah, this is her sort of, I would say, earlier style. And essentially, the poem is kind of giving examples of like when you can't be ecstatic, and it kind of goes through the different stanzas of examples of what to do. It's kind of an imperative. But yeah, that ending is so beautiful. But okay, hold that in the back of your head. So Zukofsky was a second-generation modernist after the major modernist writers of the time, Woolf, Mansfield, H.D., Pound, Eliot Stevens, D.H. Lawrence. I'm just telling you this so you have a context. So Niedecker is often identified with these objectivist poets such as Zukofsky, Reznikov, William Carlos Williams, George Oppen, and Basil Bunting. And, they argued for, it's hard to explain objectivists in a sentence, but they believed that a poem as object meant clarity and precision. But she actually didn't count herself amongst the original objectivists because she liked, I think, abstraction and surrealism. And you can see that a little bit in this poem. And arguably, this whole talk is referring to the ambiguity in her poems instead of sort of clarity. So early in her friendship with Zukofsky at the end of 1933, she visited him in New York and became his lover, became pregnant with twins. And the research says that he maybe insisted, I don't know if that's too strong, highly desired an abortion, and which she agreed to, and they somehow remained friends after that. And not surprisingly, the research also says she provided astute notes on his poems. Okay, so later on, she sort of shifted from overt surrealism to poetry that was more attuned to her surroundings, which is the poem we're looking at today, as well as some social and political poems. She also wrote some what people call folk poems, and in her book Mother, New Goose. And she wrote a set of poems for Zukofsky's son, named Paul, called For Paul, and Zukofsky didn't like those poems because of their personal qualities. So she had trouble getting that manuscript published. Actually, she just had trouble getting all of her work in the world. But later on, she shifted to these shorter sort of haiku-like poems with 5-line stanzas and went a little more sort of minimalist and is known for that condensery style, which we'll talk about that word too. And then this Paean to poem, this long poem that we're going to look at today, is one of her later poems that she wrote toward the end of her life. So it was 1966 to 1968. So when I read a poem, I don't know what you do, I like to sort of make some little notes and annotate things, you're welcome to do that, or just sort of take it all in. But I kind of love this poem. I brought it in. It reminds me of, I think of it as like a mini prelude kind of poem in its autobiographical tendencies. But the poem really carries this very elegiac tone for me. But there's also a lot of joy in the poem. It's a really interesting poem in terms of the way it was made and its subject matter. So thinking about that while we're reading might be interesting to you. She herself called the poem a kind of in memoriam for the family and place where she spent her life. So let's read it. That's enough of intro, and maybe we can do it together. So trust me on this, we'll be fine. If you don't want to read, you're welcome to pass. I can hear you. Hopefully you can hear each other, and we're going to follow along. So is that okay if we do that? We can pass it if that's okay. If yeah, you have a mic. Yeah, so we can start it. Rob can maybe start for us, and then we'll just circle around and zigzag. Okay? We can do this. I know. I have faith in you. Do you have faith in yourself? Yeah. Okay, so we're going to each read a stanza, and maybe I'll start and then Rob can go, and then we'll just keep going. Sometimes the stanzas are hard to see, but because there's so few words in them, but they're each 5 lines. And if you mess up, quote unquote, mess up, no problem. There's no such thing as messing up, is what I'm saying. So this is Paean to place, and the place was water. I'll read the first stanza. Oh, I don't have it via projection, but you can pass. Anyone can pass. Okay, just know that. There's no shame in not wanting to do this. Okay. Fish, fowl, flood, water, lily, mud, my life.
In the leaves and on water, my mother and I, born in swale and swamp and sworn to water.
My father, through marsh fog, sculled down from high ground, saw her face.
At the organ, bore the weight of lake water and the cold. He seemed for carp to be sold, that their daughter
might go high on land to learn, saw his wife turn deaf.
And away she who knew boats and ropes no longer played.
She helped him string out nets for tarring, and she could shoot. He was cool to the man
who stole his minnows by night and next day offered to sell them back. He brought in a sack of dandelion greens.
If no flood, no oranges, none at hand, no marsh marigolds where the water rose, he kept us afloat.
I mourn her not hearing canvasbacks their blast off rise from the water, not hearing Sora rail sweet.
Spoon-tapped water glass descending, scale, teardrop tittle. Did she giggle as a girl?
His skiff skimmed the coiled celery now gone from these streams due to carp. He knew duckweed.
All migrates toward mud lake bottom, knew what lay under leaf decay and on pickerel weeds.
Before summer hum, to be counted on, new leaves, new dead leaves.
He could not, like water bugs, stride surface tension. He netted loneliness.
As to his bright new car, my mother, her house, next his, averred, a hummingbird can't haul.
Anchored here in the rise and sink of life, middle years nights he sat.
Beside his shoes, frocking his chair,
roped not looped in the loop of her hair.
I grew in green slide and slant of shore and shade, child time wade through weeds.
Maples to swing from, peewee glissando, sublime slime song.
Grew riding the river, books at home pier, Shelley could steer as he read.
I was the solitary plover, a pencil for a wing bone, from the secret notes I must tilt.
Upon the pressure, execute and adjust. In us, sea air rhythm, we live by the urgent wave of the verse.
7-year molds for the solitary bird, and so young, 7 years the one dress.
For town once a week, one for home, faded, blue striped, as she piped her cry.
Dancing grounds my people had none, woodcocks had, backland, air around.
Solemnities such as what flower to take to grandfather's grave, unless.
Water lilies, he who'd bowed his head to grass as he mowed, iris now grows on fill.
For the two and for him where they lie, how much less am I in the dark than they?
Efforts lay in us before religions. At pond bottom, all things move toward the light.
Except those that freely work down to ocean's black depths. In us, an impulse tests the unknown.
River rising, flood, now melt and leave home, return, broom wet, naturally wet, under.
Soak heavy rug, water bugs hatched, no snake in the house. Where were they? She.
Who knew how to clean up after floods, he who bailed boats, houses, water endows us with buckled floors.
You with sea water running in your veins, sit down in water. Expect the long-stemmed blue speedwell to renew itself.
Oh, my floating life, do not save love for things, throw things to the flood.
Ruined by the flood, leave the new unbought, all one in the end, water.
I possessed the high word. The boy, my friend, played his violin in the great hall.
On this stream, my moon night memory, washed of hardships, maneuvers barges through the mouth.
Of the river, they fished in beauty. It was not always so. In fishes, red Mars.
Rising rides the sloughs and sluices of my mind with the persons on the edge.
Thank you. Wow, let's clap for ourselves. We did so well. That was really beautiful. Thank you for participating. I really enjoyed that, listening to all your voices. So obviously it's a very long poem. Let me ask a question before I sort of dive into some of the things that I want to point out. Can someone tell us, roughly, if you had to? I'm not afraid to summarize a poem. So what is the poem about? Does anyone want to take it's so violent, a stab at it? Does anyone? Yes. The microphone. Thank you. Thank you.
I guess I'm going to piggyback a little bit on what you said about autobiographical tendencies. It's clearly about her life experience, but also I captured some allusions. Shelley's mentioned.
Yeah.
There's also, you talked about floods, so that's involved. I could see how you're saying about sound, all those things. So to quickly summarize, I guess, I get the feeling it's more of an amalgamation of everything that she's trying to just express, not necessarily a pinnacle of, but just like something that's infinite.
Yeah.
But that somehow can relate to the reader.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Good.
my gathering.
Thank you. I really liked that. I mean, it feels kind of like, in thinking about when she wrote this poem, it's like a pinnacle, like an amalgamation. It's kind of a memoir in 41 or how many stanzas. It's amazing. You should try that sometime. I think it'd be pretty hard to do. It's her whole life, if you think about it, in hardly any words. Like, it's such a spare poem when you think about it, but thank you. So I'm just gonna, we're gonna pick out a few stanzas here and there. Some of them are a little difficult. You mentioned the allusions. There are a whole bunch in here that I'll point out at some point, but I'm just gonna point out a few things, and then we'll cover the stanzas in different ways here and there. And I'm sure you notice a whole bunch of things. I'm sure that I can see some of the brains going. So I'm just gonna talk about some of the things that I noticed. One of the things that I want to talk about is the title and the epigraph. So what's a Paean? Does anyone know what a Paean is? What did you say? Yeah, so it's like a hymn of praise, or it's a joyous song. It's a tribute, which is really interesting, thinking about a Paean to place. And the poem doesn't feel super joyful, right? So the title helps us a bit, actually. And it's what I always call, like what I call the other title. It's sort of a helping title. But again, interestingly, the word Paean is very positive, and the poem oftentimes isn't, at least in subject matter. But again, going back, I'm going to talk a little bit about, I actually sometimes find this poem very joyous in its diction and syntax, and in its construction and making. And I feel like it also ebbs and flows between like very sad moments to like very joyful moments. But then what happens next? We have this thing on the right, and the place was water. Is it an epigraph, or is it the first line of the poem? Why is it over there to the right? How might this line relate to the title of the poem? It's almost like a subtitle or side note, something someone might mumble under their breath as an aside. Are the italics a whisper or an assertion? So right away, we already have nuance and ambiguity as possibility. The fact that the place is water suddenly changes everything, right? When we think of, so the epigraph subverts the idea of place as what we might typically think of as a place, as physical location, as we're in a place now, land, home, city. The idea of water as place suddenly opens up the poem to possibility, strangeness, and mystery. It also feels like an argument about the conceptual idea of place being one that is not static. Note that the poem never mentions what place that it's referring to, buttressing the sort of argument of the poem about the idea of place being a bit more fluid, as possibly even a state of consciousness or even a memory versus a physical place, which we'll see the conceptual idea of memory. It's going to appear prominently in the last three stanzas of the poem, which I feel like it's like the last three stanzas are a little bit complicated. So we'll talk about that in a second or in a bit. So interestingly, in the original printed editions, this epigraph appears as two italicized lines, the line break coming after the word place. Niedecker made a handmade autograph book. I was so excited when I found this. Look, it's her handwriting. And where these 5 words appear as a single line. And I don't know, maybe she felt that a line break at place was too heavy-handed. Another interesting thing about this autographed book is that each stanza was on its own page. So there, fish, fowl, flood, water, lily, mud, my life. So I just bring that to you to think about. So I'm going to also point us to, this brings us to the 5-line stanzas. What is that called? Does anyone know? The 5-line stanza? Yeah. Oh, I listed for you. What is it? Go for it. Yeah. Gosh, that was such a not smart thing. But you were smart because you looked. So it seems that as if Niedecker wanted each stanza on one page like I showed you here, which would allow each stanza to sit sort of as its own unit, even more so. But in a bit, I'm going to talk about how each stanza reaches to the one before and the one after in interesting ways, which I see you nodding. You already noticed this, whether the stanzas are together or isolated. So again, the stanzas are cinquains, which are 5-lined stanzas. And to me, they feel like little discrete art pieces, collages, little rocks or seashells left on a beach. The poem can feel like what remains. And my fiction writer friend said, the poem looks like what's left after a flood. I thought that was really beautiful. So the way the poem is laid out feels like it's controlling breath as it moves too, as is the negative space in the poem, which seems to control breath along with lineation, indentation, and syntax, as well as to the line breaks, which we'll talk more about in a second. But I just want to mention the form of each stanza for now and have that in the sort of shadow of our minds as we continue discussing the poem. I also want to point out something else, which I noticed, which I'm sure that you noticed, is which I just labeled aesthetic storytelling. So at the beginning of this talk, I pointed to, we talked about narrative and story. So to me, it's once I kind of read all her biography, I was like, oh, it's all there. It's all underneath the poem. And so that you can see the narrative the way you might see a skeleton, though, but not the flesh or the body. So we can summarize the first 3 stanzas very easily if we know, especially if we know the narrative, the backstory of Niedecker, how she grew up. Does anyone want to summarize the first 3 stanzas? Like if you had to summarize the first 3 stanzas, what might you say? Anyone? If no one wants to, I can do it. But I'm happy with waiting. Okay, over there. Oh, wait, microphone, thanks. Yeah.
She and her mother were both born in the marshlands, but her father came in from elsewhere.
Good, I like that. That's kind of what I wrote as well. Yeah, I grew up near water and mud, near floods and animals kind of thing, amongst beauty and foulness. I grew up in nature, the trees, oh gosh, I wrote a lot more than you. The trees and on water like my mother, right? And we were made of water, sworn to it like a marriage. My father, on the other hand, do you see how he's separated? Came down from the high ground, from elsewhere, fell in love with my mother, or maybe whatever, who knows, while she was playing an organ, either literally or figuratively. And note that he's higher, right? As if he's coming down the staircase as the poem is shaped, kind of like a savior or a deity, which makes his disappointment later in the poem all the more poignant. Do you remember that part in the poem? Yeah, where he's rocking. Okay, so the biographical background helps us to understand meaning in the traditional sense, but arguably, once you know the background, you realize it actually doesn't matter in the poem, that the poem's power lies in the stylistic choice to tell the story in an aesthetic way. Essentially, the details begin to feel superfluous. We get the sense that water, place, and her family's story evoked large emotions for the speaker. The spareness of language seemed to be a way to express large emotional territory for Niedecker. Spareness as deep expression, spareness as electric wire and emotional resonance. I might make an argument that what Niedecker replaces narrative detail with is music and rhythm, like the sounds of birds. So the next thing I want to talk about is sound. So let's see. Oh yeah, there. Sonic and rhythmic elements as narrative intention. So in a letter to Gail Rube, her friend, Niedecker wrote, I like planting poems in deep silence where each person gets at the poem for himself, herself, their self. He has to come to the poems with an ear for all the music they can give. So this quote to me says a few things. Maybe the silence she was referring to was, narrative silence. Yet what she fills the poem with is a spiritual music from nature. This music is right from the marsh, those twittering and squawking noises that she wrote about. She also says that the reader is active in making the poem, which I find to be interesting. So after I wrote what I just said, I found a quote that seems to echo my thoughts. In a letter to Corman, she wrote, I get for the first time that meaning has something to do with song. So we see right away in the first stanza how Niedecker uses sound as narrative, rhythm as storytelling, in the absence of direct narrative. So does anyone notice anything sonic? Like, what are some of the sonic elements that we see even just in the first stanza? Does anyone want to point to what they see in the first stanza? Yeah, there's a hand right behind you. Yeah.
I got excited because of the alliteration, but also it's like I feel like with water, like there's like, you know how we talk about like throat clearing a little bit in
Yeah.
the poem, and I love how it's like not edited out,
Uh-huh.
obviously, but like it's like a throat clearing that feels like somehow like aquatic in nature.
Yeah, yeah. I like what you said about the alliteration. We see it right away. You see the hard accents of fish, foul, flood, and sort of the way it sort of cascades down. She really uses the visual space in a really kind of movement to sort of somatic, embodied kind of poetry. Foul, I can't help but think it's a homonym for, what is it a homonym for? Foul, Foul. And how flood rhymes with mud, which we'll talk about the rhyming in a second. So the poem right away is teaching us how to read it, which arguably is what all poems do. So I think to be a really great reader of poetry is to like almost kind of release yourself and allow the poem to teach you how to read it. And, you know, arguably it's through sound via music, our ears versus conventional narrative logic. So I can also just imagine the sonic pleasures entering her ear constantly. In a March 1962 letter to Corman, she wrote, "Thousands of geese make a wilderness in your ear here." And in April 1962, she wrote, "Frog trills, barred, maybe it was barned, barred owls, scary noise, splashes in the water." In that area, there are all sorts of frogs there, including the American toad. Well, I think the toad is not a frog. Is a toad a frog? No, the toad is a toad. Otherwise, it'd be the American frog. But there's American toads, green frogs, northern leopard frogs, wood frogs, American bullfrogs. I just wanted to bring us to her environment a little bit. So I found a clip of the gray tree frog trilling. Close your eyes, actually, maybe for a little bit. Let's see if we can hear the gray tree frog trilling. Isn't that beautiful? Like I've not thought, I wouldn't necessarily know that was a frog, but with listening to it, yeah, it does sound like trilling. So there's more alliteration in the second stanza, right? Happening there that we notice. Is this the second stanza? Yeah. So we see the swale, swamp, and sworn. We have assonance. Wait, is this the second stanza? That's 3. Okay, that's fine. 3 is fine. And the O sounds of organ, right? You hear the organ, the bore, the cold, and the sold. And one of my favorite stanzas is 11, where the speaker mourns her mother not being able to hear the Sora bird, and it's spoon tapped. And who read that stanza? It was somewhere. Someone read it really beautifully. Thank you. Spoon-tapped water glass, descending scale, teardrop tittle. I just thought it'd be fun to bring in the canvas back for us to listen to. So if you'll play along with me and close your eyes, we'll listen to this beautiful canvas back. And has anyone ever heard a Sora rail bird before? Let's listen to that one. And close your eyes too. Do you hear that in her writing? Spoon-tapped water glass, descending scale, teardrop tittle. And these pyrotechnics of language, as well as the dash as small sort of stepping stones to jump over water, I feel like are these narrative propellers. You know, and going back to the first stanza, it's also very rhythmic. So there are 3 accents, right? In fish, fowl, flood, then water, lily, mud, which scans. How does water, lily, mud scan? Does anyone like to scan poetry? Who wants to scan that for us? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, do you want, can you pass the microphone? I'm sorry to make you run around. This is terrible. I just think there are enough people here we can just chat a little more. Yeah.
Wait, sorry, where am I looking?
Yeah, so water, lily, mud. How would you scan that? Like accented and unaccented.
Wait, which stanza am I? I'm sorry.
You're in the first stanza.
First
water, lily, mud. How would you
Okay,
say?
it sounds trochaic to me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Good.
stressed and then unstressed, right?
Yeah. So let me see if I could go back.
Water,
Yeah, that sounds right. See, there it is. Water, lily, mud. And then I scan my life as, I mean, my life could be my life, water, lily, mud, my life, or my life, depending on, you know, it's that one's a little tricky. You can do it as a spondy, which is bam, bam, or an I am, which is unaccented and accented. And for those of you who are not comfortable scanning, basically it's just dividing a word into syllables. Once I figured that out, it was so easy. You just divide a word into syllables, and the syllables are either unaccented or accented. So either way, there's a sense of harshness and difficulty. Can you feel that in that first stanza, right? As emphasized through these hard stresses. And the rhyming pattern, did anyone notice the rhyming pattern in the poem? I'm sure many of you did. Raise your hand if you want to tell us about what you noticed about that. Oh, there. I also saw Seth nodding too. But it's okay. Yeah.
I'm kind of putting this in my own words. I don't know how to describe it, but sometimes I feel like there's a kind of distant rhyming. I know that's not at all a concept in poetry, but sometimes it feels like that. It's kind of stretching itself out. That's the best way I can describe it.
I like that. Good.
Yeah.
And Seth, right? Your name is Seth? Yeah. There's the microphone.
Okay, well, sorry. Okay, so in stanza 2, we have, I guess, the obvious rhymes of born and sworn.
Yeah.
Internal. And then in actually going into stanza 2 and into stanza 3, we have water and father. And then fog also echoes back to father. And then, down and ground. Okay, I might be crazy, but I feel like it's not really. Maybe there's a slant rhyme in Oregon and face, or maybe I'm just looking at the A's. But I also, can we revisit fish, fowl, and flood for a brief moment?
Yeah, let's do that.
So I worked with a mentor in my first semester in my MFA program, and we worked with Scansion and kicked my ass. But it was helpful. And in terms of the music, though, I feel like the beats on fish, fowl, and flood, if we were using what is it called? A decimer? Sorry. When there's a thing going back and forth. Thank you. I feel like there's a speed at which you could almost set it to where, there's a speed that she's setting with those words. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's almost, I don't know if it's a quarter or if it's an eighth, but she's setting it with that.
Right.
And it's also being emphasized by the fact that each of those words are being stressed.
Yeah, I think you're right. She's teaching us how, when pacing, when to slow down, when to speed up, what words to emphasize, what words not to emphasize. And it does. It's so easy to memorize this first stanza, fish, fowl, flood, because it's bam, 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 one syllable, lots of monosyllables in this poem too. And then water, lily, mud, my life. Yeah, you had a comment, question?
Part of the ambiguity that I really like with the first 3 words, especially fish and flood, is that I read them first as nouns and then go back and actually see them as verbs.
Right. Yeah.
And I think she does that over and over in the poem, which is just broadens it.
Yes, I love that. That is so smart. And you'll see that sort of nuance and thus sort of ambiguity as possibility over and over. And to go back to the rhyming, though, is that the third and fourth line, the first and third and fourth lines of each stanza, the last word is generally rhymed. So flood and mud, born and sworn, down and ground, cold and sold. So again, I sense that her rhymes, like the other sonic pleasures I just mentioned, are ways in which Niedecker uses sound as narrative and rhythm as storytelling amidst the absence of a more linear and explicit storytelling style. In essence, sound and rhythm perform narrative, right? Kind of what we were talking about earlier. So I might also argue that in the midst of a poem that's grappling with loss, grief, and floods, sonic pleasure and rhythmic pleasures are tugging against all of that loss, as well as the intense interior memory retrieving process of the poem. I mean, poetry is sometimes just really fun to write. I was talking about this today with some translators and poets, and I was saying, yeah, I mean, it's strangest feeling. I'm writing the saddest poem sometimes, and I'm so happy. The process of writing, I felt that joyful making process in her poems. And one can also argue that sound and rhythms in the poem orchestrate tension when those sounds, and especially rhymes in this case, vary. So I'm sure some of you were kind of like, oh, there's some parts that aren't rhyming, which we were talking about. So if we map all the rhymes, which you're welcome to do on your own, we can see where the rhymes change and become inexact. So there are a lot of slant rhymes, to go back to what Seth is saying, and I see a nod over there as well. So just an example, in the sixth stanza, we see that we see that boat and rope are inexact rhymes. Is that, let's see, where am I? There it is. So, and you know, when I see things like, so poetry for me is like patterning, and then like places where the pattern sort of becomes dismantled, and then I always ask, well, why? For me, I noticed that this sudden pattern change occurs right after kind of what I would argue is partially difficult and a poignant part of the poem, where the mother loses her hearing. And that inexact rhyme continues in the next stanza with shoot and cool, and rhyme becomes pretty irregular throughout the rest of the poem, but there are shadows of rhyme and a lot of slant rhymes. So these irregular rhymes, I argue, become sort of destabilizing. So perhaps a way to think about it is that the rhyming is trickery, because the poem begins with strict rhyme schemes that then becomes a way to destabilize, restabilize, only to destabilize, to the point where the question becomes, which is the stabilizing scheme, rhyme or off rhyme? I sense that Niedecker is keeping the reader on a kind of tightrope, but she decides for us when we lean this way or that. In some ways, the rhyming and the way it kind of slants and changes, it feels dangerous, in the same way maybe living in that kind of landscape felt. Okay, let me check my time. I'm going to move more quickly. So there are other things I want to point to, such as syntactical delay or rearrangement. So she moves stuff around, and it doesn't come as sort of like a regular narrative. So she starts the poem in medias res with fish, foul, flood, and it's only until the last line of the first stanza we get the first person, my life. So conventionally, we might say, oh, once upon a time, there was a princess or whatever, a frog who lived in the bog. So here in this poem, we start with water, then what's in or near the water, what happens to the water, as if water is the main subject and character of the poem. And then in the next stanza, we see how the speaker and the mother are together in a couplet, which we talked about, yet she's separate from her father, who is in the third stanza. The syntax and perhaps arrangement are very important in Niedecker's poem. Her words almost feel like musical notes, if you play instruments, note like in a score, that are very orchestrated and arranged and rearranged. They move and ripple. So another example of syntactical arrangement is in the third stanza. So my father is separated from the verb phrase saw her face. So with these lines, they're separated with the brackets, or the parentheses, through marsh, fog, skull, down from high ground, saw her face. Do you see how that works? So there's a rearrangement of narrative, or maybe an interruption of narrative with the story of the fog. So in this poem, nature is always primary, a character or main character, and always mingling in between, around, and within other people. In this poem, people are not fully people without their interaction with nature. Everyone and everything are the same, so all monosyllables together kind of thing. We see that also in the eighth stanza. You see the interruptions there too. He brought in a sack of dandelion green, stanza break and line break, if no flood. So conventionally, so sometimes when I think about poetry, I think, okay, how might we say this in speech? And that helps me understand the poem. One might say, if there was no flood, he brought in a sack of dandelion greens. Right? Similarly, the syntax is also delayed in the next few lines. We might say, where the water rose, there were no oranges and no marsh marigolds. Instead, the poem reverses the syntax. Do you see how that happens? So it makes it a little bit harder to read, but once you kind of learn how to read her, I think it's interesting. And this rearrangement and delay of information, I think it's suspenseful and surprising, destabilizing, and creating tension in the narrative. And it also allows Niedecker to place emphasis on certain things over other things. So Carl Phillips has this great essay about syntax. And I can't remember what it's called, Muscularity of Eros or something. It's really this beautiful essay that kind of talks about syntax as a way of hierarchy, of sort of showing for the reader and the poet what should be emphasized, and creating tension and elongating. So syntax is sort of sexual tension kind of thing. It's a wonderful essay. You should seek it out. It's on online, easy to find. Okay, so I'm gonna move quickly because I'm gonna run out of time if I do not. So I'm sure some of you noticed this, right? The lack of punctuation. Tell me about what you think about that. Like, what do you think the lack of punctuation does for the poem? Anyone have any thoughts? Yeah.
I think you just get to breathe more, honestly.
I didn't hear what you said. What did you say?
I think you just get to breathe more
Yeah.
as a reader.
Yeah, good. I like that. Anyone else? You get to breathe more. We got 2 hands here.
It's also interesting to think about in the written manuscript how each stanza was on its own page.
Yeah.
And then so without the punctuation, it does feel like the image or the stanza is floating. And so it is contained and discrete because of and even as the stanzas are together, because of the pattern of the stanzas.
Yeah.
And we sort of know what's coming. So in that way, I as a reader, I'm not needing punctuation as much to know when something ends and something is beginning.
Great. It's good to see you. Hi. I was like trying to listen to you. I was like, oh my God, I know you. Okay, there's hand in the back. 2 hands in the back, actually, maybe. Yeah. 3rd hand, yeah.
Yeah, kind of going off what you just said, it makes me think of how stanza is room. It's a room, right? And it's a flooded room in this poem because the water comes in, like each stanza comes into and out of the next stanza.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's
Good.
my only observation.
I like that. And yeah, go ahead.
I think it also, I guess, in kind of contrapuntal motion to the first 2 observations, links all the fragments and suggests that there's some connection and tethering that exists between both the line fragments and the stanza fragments. So typically punctuation would be used to divide clauses up and suggest there's a difference between 1 or 2 things. But in the same way that I think like the form and the subject matter of water flows and continues and kind of ebbs in and out. And B, the subject of her life is a continual, life happens as a singular thread, and we don't get to place periods and commas as time goes on. And so I think there's a important imitating or mimicking effect that the lack of punctuation has with the subject matter and the form.
Good. I love that. Go ahead.
But also, like, there is some punctuation, not to be super contrary here, but there are not periods and commas, but there are these em dashes throughout. There are colons in a couple of places. There's at least 1 ellipsis, but they're like the kinds of punctuation that kind of move you forward more than they like set things down in neat little boxes. There's a little bit of ambiguity. There's a little bit of space you still have to fill in about what those relationships are.
Yeah.
There's just, I don't know, it just shades a little bit of drama onto the pause somehow.
Yeah, I love that. Drama and tethering. These words are great. Did you have a comment, Seth? Oh, did you have one too? Okay, there's one more here. Yeah. Okay.
I just want it was really quick, but I like when Megan said something about you see what's coming, and it made me think about the original version, like you brought up, and how each was on a different page.
Yeah.
So if we're thinking about punctuation and we're thinking about space between things, then there was more than enough of that before it became something that was existing on one page or in one packet. Like
Yeah. Good. All of these comments are so smart, and we could talk about punctuation for like the entire hour, actually, which is what makes poetry and poets so awesome. Yeah, and I agree with everything everyone said. I mean, I was thinking about how things hinge. So like things get double uses. So in this example, you know, my life can refer above it, fish, fowl, flood, water, lily, mud, my life. And it also can hinge downward, my life in the leaves and on water. So there's this kind of doubling and sometimes a tripling. You know, her poems kind of reminded me of those collaborative poems and Japanese poems. Do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah, the renkus, where each new stanza, it's usually 2 or 3 lines linked to the previous stanza via sort of theme, words, ideas, but can also shift away from it. And then the renga. Does anyone know what the renga is? It's a haiku and then a couplet, but they kind of reach up and then they move forwards. It's kind of, this poem just reminded me of that. And I think the punctuation or the minimal punctuation sort of contributes to that feeling. And here again, you know, there's so many examples everywhere, but my father is kind of like that hinge. It's like a swinging door. It could swing up or it could swing down, or maybe it's a swinging hatch. As a continuation of the first stanza, my mother and I born in swale and swamp and soared to water, my father. But, you know, but it can also swing downwards, like my father through marsh fog. And so things can just have sort of multi-use. And, you know, the well-known stanza 22 does that. I must tilt also gets to hinge. And I mean, 17, 18, 26, 27, 33, 34, you can find those on your own. And I like what Michael Davidson, the critic, wrote, phrases become modular, joining with and separating from each other in a constant circulating mobile. I sort of love that image of the mobile. Modular made me think of IKEA, but I think, you know, you know what I'm saying. Okay, so I'm almost done here. I'm gonna go quickly. Line breaks. So I'd love to just spend a few minutes talking about line breaks. And there's a lot of syntactic doubling happening, right? Does anyone want to say anything about line breaks that they noticed that was interesting, that contributes to this sort of, you know, multiple meanings and things like that we talked about? Yeah, way in the back. Nick.
I feel like there's a humor that permeates the whole poem.
Yeah.
But it's also like very serious subject matter, but there's also humor within it, and the ambiguity that comes from the line break. It's like a timing of a joke,
yeah.
But also the double hinge. It's like, is this a joke here, or is it a serious next sentence?
Right.
It's very interesting.
She's so coy, isn't she? Yeah, this example is just one, you know, he was cool. I mean, I don't know if we could use cool. I don't know if cool is cool for us, like back then, but the modern use of cool, but it also could mean sort of unloving, you know, removed. But then it breaks, right, into he was cool to the man who stole his minnows. So it has like a lot of usages, and those line breaks, this syntactic doubling, what I call it, happens in a lot of different places. This is a poignant part in the poem for me. You know, might go high on land, what stands as 15, to learn, saw his wife turn deaf and away. That turn, you know, just you think immediately, oh, turn, but then it's turn deaf. And then the turn away, that kind of connects there too. So I think that's just very playful for a very kind of sad moment in the poem. And what else? Yeah, here's another one. He could not, and there are those beautiful M dashes. I always love this part right here. Why do you think she puts, I mean, there's no right answer. I have my ideas. Why do you think she puts those lovely M dashes, the like water bugs there? Anyone want to guess? Yeah, right? They kind of like looks like little water bugs. It's striding the surface tension, but that he netted loneliness is just so poignant, and you're tricked a little bit, kind of going back to what Nick was saying in the back. It's like you're in water, you're looking at the water bugs, you're distracted by the cute water bugs who are striding surface tension, you're in the water in your mind. So he netted, you're still in the water, line break, loneliness. So it's just kind of, I feel like she's playing with us in some ways. And so, yeah, I feel like these rhymes and the sonic play, along with the syntactic doubling and tripling at the line breaks, gave Niedecker pleasure and joy, again, during the writing process. And yeah, and in the last three stanzas, which I would love to just spend a few seconds talking about, you know, we see a depiction of this joy of writing, and as her memory travels on water and through her mouth. Okay, so we could spend a whole hour on these last three stanzas. There's so much happening here. I'm just gonna pitch to you sort of my reading of it really quickly. So her memory travels on water and through her mouth, or the poem, right? And the mouth of the river. The memories are fished in beauty, which I just love, but it wasn't always like that. So how interesting that memories can be beautiful, even when living through them might not have been. And even in these last few stanzas, it's hard to link things back to their subjects, so that everything kind of swirls together like water and memory. So these last three stanzas are a great example of how a poem's ending can lean into something larger and opaque. We could talk about these for a while. You know, on the stream could mean the river, right? But it could also mean the poem itself as the site of memory, or even a stream of consciousness. The word moon night. Did we notice that's moon night? Did anyone read it wrong or incorrectly as moonlight in your head? It's moon night. It's a sleight of hand from the more, you know, commonplace moonlight, and it implies a darkness to her memories. Her memory is washed of hardships, which could mean washed clean of hardships or washed over with hardships. Then we get the word hardships that turns into hard ships as a pun when we see the next line of maneuvers barges. Through the mouth is the mouth of the river, but also through the speaker's mouth as this poem, as writing. They fished in beauty could literally be the people on the island fishing, or they could point upwards to the subject of memory, right? Then the poem moves fluidly from the fishes in the marshes to the astronomical and astrological fishes, maybe Pisces, and the planet Mars, that's red Mars, which feels like anger and difficulty that was in the past after the line, "It was not always so." Rides the sloughs and sluices of the mind carry so many meanings too. And note the rides, the sloughs, and sluices is also missing its subject, but I suppose it could be memories or Mars. And then we end with "of my mind with the persons on the edge." So the persons on the edge could be herself or other people who are always teetering on the edge of poverty, at the mercy of nature and floods. So when I arrived at the end of the poem, that word edge sort of made me look back at the entire poem and think about how the poem, the shape of the poem with its step-like appearance performs being on the edge with each line break. Okay, so we could keep going on and on about present tense, past tense, etc. There's a lot we can talk about this ending, but it's not an easy ending. And it took me a while to sort of unpack it. And if you read it again, you start actually questioning your own take on it, which I think is so interesting as a poem. I'm gonna point us to read this poem because she's really well known for this poem, and then we'll sort of end it. Who's read this poem before? Oh, not as many as I thought. Wonderful. We can read this together. Who wants to read the whole thing for us? It's really short. Pass the microphone around. Someone raise your hand. This is probably her most well-known poem. Poet's Work. There's someone right there. Thank you for reading it.
Poet's Work. Grandfather advised me, learn a trade. I learned to sit at desk and condense. No layoff from this condensery.
Thank you. All right, let's just spend a few minutes talking about this poem. What do we notice? Anything anyone want to point out? There are no wrong answers. Yep, in the front here. Oh, wait for your microphone. Yeah, thanks.
It feels like it's subverting a few things that I guess that's but that you would in prose. There's
Yeah.
like more proper use. I think I felt it when I learned to sit at desk. I was like, where is A,
Yeah.
for example?
Yeah.
So
Good. I like that. You notice that. She's actually like condensing as she's writing at the poem, which is fascinating. And yeah, she wrote to Corman about the sentence. For me, the sentence lies in wait, all those prepositions and connections like an early spring flood. A good thing my follow-up feeling has always been condense, condense. Good. Anyone else? Okay, anything about the poem?
Since she lived through the Depression, this no layoff from this condensery, the sort of condensery doubles as an activity, condensation, but also like a cannery. So it's sort of a professional joke.
Good. I like that. How about no layoff? Since you mentioned that, what do we think about that? Those 2 words, no layoff. Going back, yeah, go ahead. There are microphones. The microphone's coming along.
It has the socioeconomic implication as well.
Yeah.
So it's like playful. And
Right.
The doubling of the meaning.
Yeah, it doubles, right, it doubles meaning. It's no layoff from like work, but poetry, there's like, I mean, I assume most of you, if not all of you, or probably all of you are poets, right? It's like, there's no layoff from writing. It has that sort of double meaning, and right, because it's a sense of never being able to stop, because writing has this sort of like endless, relentless calling. Even if you're in a moment of writer's block, like whether you feel it's a good or bad thing, I feel like it does return this calling it's like a siren. It's like, come to poetry. I think that's just really coy and smart. Good. We could talk about this poem for an hour as well, but we're not going to. I'm going to tie up here because I know we're out of time, and I'll just read a couple summary things. So when I was reading ultimately Paean to Place, I felt like I was reading water, as if I was reading a poem made of water, the way all her distinct choices worked together and against each other to shape-shift the poem to double and triple possibilities and meaning and thus emotion. The inaccuracies, imprecisions, and impossibilities of reading water paradoxically allow truth and emotion to puncture through in her poems. Douglas Chase said, the impulse to concision must strike some readers as an impairment. Based on Niedecker's example, I would sooner argue that leaving out is the freedom you fight for when you can no longer bear the received deceit of the sentence, the connectives and prepositions that accumulate with the weight of irredeemably inaccurate history. I would add that Niedecker's poems aren't simply about concision, but about creating a new form of narrative, one that mirrors nature, water, and the sounds of trilling and flitting birds. In one of her last letters to Corman, she wrote, I look out and see winter goldfinches, wild canaries. Strange to see greenish yellow in winter, red-winged blackbirds here storming the trees. A noise storm. I love that, a noise storm. And for 3 days, geese going over with their glorious noise. It must mean early spring. No flood expected here. Wish you were coming over this spring. And that was in March 7th, 1970. So she died later that year on December 31st, 1970. And maybe we'll end with one of the sounds from her noise storm on Black Hawk Island. Here are these really beautiful red-winged birds with some geese. Thank you for listening and engaging. And I have a writing exercise in the back. I just wrote it for this particular thing. So if you want to try that, you're welcome to. Thank you so much for coming. Thanks. Out of time? Or do you have questions? Do we have time? Yeah. Does anyone have any questions or anything they want to say? Sometimes commentary is super interesting too. Yes, go ahead.
Can I ask 2 questions?
Go for it.
Okay, so I have a question about kind of like linking you and Niedecker.
Yeah.
So I don't know chronologically, like when you decided to do a deep dive into her.
Yeah.
But coming into the talk, I was really curious about how her relationship to the condensery and brevity and concision, whether or not it informed your work, and in particular your work when you were writing The Trees Witness Everything and the Tonkas.
Yeah.
And then also, I feel like I know what you mean by the helping title. Like it seems like, I guess, obvious.
Yeah.
But also, I wanted to know more if you could speak to titles and how they work and the work that they do, and maybe a little bit of how you categorize like the work that titles do.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I think I've always been reading Niedecker and I have this really I have a skeptical personality, so I'm sure actually I've noticed a lot of poets have that personality. Like we read something and we're like, oh yeah, you know, our like skepticism emerges and the critical mind comes. So I've always been sort of like just sort of skeptical about her work until maybe just recently. So you know, I have this Saturday morning poetry group that meets, and we've been meeting for 5 years. We read poems by dead people, and I bring in a lot of modernist, poets like Niedecker, and so this revisiting was very helpful for me because it opened up new ideas about poetry and poetics, and I read a lot of her criticism, and I just began to appreciate her poems and this sort of how smart and just sort of how she just didn't, she felt like not a lot of information was necessary. And I just appreciate that because I don't know how you all tend to write, but I tend to be like lots of writing and then I have to go and condense. And I appreciated seeing that it seemed like she does that, did that as well. And Jean Valentine was, famously would hang her poem on the wall, and just every time she walked by, she just said, I'm going to cut a word out. Try that. I mean, that's discipline. I sort of begin to fall in love with my words kind of thing. And so, but I appreciated this starting out with more and then sort of trimming things out. But yeah, for me, it's like, I wrote that book before. I think I was really digging deeply. And then your question about titles are very difficult, but I like how she's sort of, if you saw the first poem we read, it's sort of like that title is, like more of a title that kind of gives you the argument of the poem. And I like how her later poems are coy, because a Paean, like we said, is a song. It's like a song of praise, but she's sort of praising things, but she's also giving a lot of sadness, especially when she talks about the other people who were in the community. My people, dancing grounds, my people had none. Woodcocks had backland air around. Solemnities, which is sadness, such as what flower to take to grandfather's grave. It's just like there's a lot of community sadness, and yet she's titles it Paean to place. It's sort of fun. Like she's not afraid to trick you for fun, and so I appreciated that sort of titling style. Yeah, thank you. Anyone else? We have 2 questions up here.
I'm just curious because I heard the great talk between you and Helena de Groot on Poetry Off the Shelf.
Oh
I'm
yeah.
like in love with that podcast.
Oh yeah, that was a great.
That's also how I found you and many others.
Uh-huh.
So how would you describe your call to poetry?
Yeah. It's my first sort of, like the world is hard. And the way I sort through my own life is through poems. And I'm sure, how many of you are actually poets in here? How many of you write poems? Probably all of you, right? Wouldn't you say that too? Like it's the thing that you do. It's where I sort through those things. But yeah, I mean, I love poetry. I just love it so much. Just like being able to read poems like this and think about them. I actually think I enjoy reading more than writing. And I enjoy talking about other people's poems more than I like writing my own poems. But I just find the whole process to be just so pleasurable, and the distillation of language and the word play. That's why I like her so much. It's like just moving words around is just really fun. You had a question, yeah.
Thank you. You were talking about how Paean has one stanza per page.
Yeah, on that little book that she made and gave to her friend, yeah.
Was it bound? So this is a book?
Yeah, she sort of hand bound it. It kind of reminded me of like Emily Dickinson, but yeah, she put it. That's sort of how she put it together, and she sort of visualized it that way, which leaves just even more space, even more silence and gaps between each stanza. But they still call to each other. It's like they echo to each other. Yeah, was that? Oh, I didn't let you finish your question.
No.
Yeah.
That was most of it. And
yeah.
If you know, I mean, she's writing through the 70s in rural Wisconsin. Did she have access to a typewriter, or was all of her manuscripts handwritten?
She died in 1970. So yeah, in terms of how she wrote, that's a great question. But my understanding is that it was mostly by hand.
Very cool. So anything she made, she sort of hand wrote and she hand.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I don't know if she bound everything, but she had her own library. You can actually visit where she grew up, and people regularly go there and make a trip of it and check it out. And there's like, her house is still there and things like that. Yeah.
Very cool. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a question in the middle here.
I actually grew up about an hour away from Black Hawk Island.
Cool.
So, yeah, this has been great because I feel like I've been able to reconnect with that because I read Niedecker so much when I was younger.
Yeah.
In order to feel like that land that I grew up in and those woods and those creeks, they felt a bit more of importance because she was there. So thank you for this on a personal note.
Yeah.
My question is not related to Niedecker. Anytime I encounter a poet in the wild, I try to ask this question. Do you have a favorite word?
Oh, a favorite word. What have been some people's responses?
I have a list. I put them all together so that I can someday maybe use them all in my own poem. My favorite one was from Anne Carson.
Of course.
I told her to write down in any language, and she wrote it in Greek, so I had to translate it. I don't remember what the word is exactly, but essentially it came out to be meaning machine. That is kind of what a word is,
A meaning machine. So that was in Greek. Greek in one word, though.
Yes.
Okay, got it. Okay. I would say I don't have a favorite word. I love strange combinations of words. So I just like strangeness. So for me, it's like if I think about like my own poetics, which you should all think about too, it's like what do you love about your own writing, or what do you love about when you read? I love this, like these really strange combinations of language. And sometimes it could be imagery. Other times, she does this too. I'm sure some of you noticed this, and we didn't even get to talk about these words that she creates with the dashes. So she just makes up her own combination. Child dash time in stanza 19, home dash pier. Oh, we didn't even talk about the literary allusions. So the Shelley one is right there. So, Shelley said that he could steer and read at the same time because one was mental and the other one was mechanical. And in 18, there is roped, not looped in the loop of her hair, which is Yeats's. Its poem is from Brown Penny, which if you haven't read, it's just a lovely poem about love and sort of young love. And so there are a bunch of literary allusions in here. So she read a lot, and she also wanted us to know that she read, which I think is really wonderful in this poem about floods and her history. And there's another one. Oh, and the Shelley one is Ode to the West Wind. And there's another, 23 was Robert Duncan's essay, Towards an Open Universe. We live by the urgent wave of the verse. So yeah, long answer to your question. I don't have a favorite word. In fact, I don't really feel a connection to words. I just want to play with them. Yeah. Awesome. Should we end? Let's do it. Okay. Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate you.